This grinder is the Fiorenzato AllGround Sense. I've had a lot of fun using it so far, but also a little confused by it. Quite confused? Let's dig in. It's what's called an on-demand grind by weight grinder. On-demand meaning it's got this hopper up here full of beans all the time, as opposed to what's called a single dosing grinder, where you have to weigh out one serving of beans at a time. Those can be really great in some ways, but also a little tedious to use if you're trying to work quickly. But what gets me really excited is that grind by weight feature, and let me tell you why. Short answer is, it's going to save you a lot of time and headache and coffee waste when you're dialing in your coffee. Now, typically on an on-demand grinder, you're going to have two settings that you can adjust. One is grind size or grind setting, and the second is time. The trick is that as you adjust that grind setting, it's going to change how quickly the beans actually come out. So you might get a different amount of coffee grounds in 10 seconds at one grind setting versus another. That can get kind of tedious and frustrating. Grind by weight grinders like this one are really good because they get rid of that time factor entirely. You just set the weight of beans that you want and tell it to go, and whatever your grind setting, a little scale in here will measure out that weight. Now, there are a couple other home grinders that have this technology. The Baratza Sette 270 WI was one of the first ones. It's a conical burr grinder. The Eureka Mignon Libra is another one. It's got 55 millimeter flat burrs. This one comes with 64 millimeter flat burrs that Fiorenzato calls it a dark tea titanium coating. And this unit in particular was sent to me by my partners at Espresso Parts, and it comes in, depending on the finish, anywhere from $12.50 to $13.50 US. Now, personally, most of the time I'm using a single dosing grinder, and that's just because every cup of coffee that I drink, I'm switching the bean up. I'm going to decaf or back to espresso, dark roast, light roast. I'm all over the map with different coffees that I'm drinking. But let me tell you, when I have family over, I am using this grinder, dialing it in, and just cranking out drink after drink. It is a real pleasure to use. You know, you can do 6, 8, 12 drinks. You're not going to be worrying about anything. You don't need to weigh anything. You just stick the portafilter in there and it's a dream to use. So if you do that kind of thing with any kind of frequency, or if you have found a coffee that you like and generally you tend to stick with that, a grinder like this, fantastic option. Now, a couple other really quick notes. This grinder is going to spin at 1400 RPM on 50 Hertz power, or in North America, it's going to spin at 1600 RPM on 60 Hertz power. And as far as how that translates into time to grind a shot, at least for me anyways, it was around 9 to 10 seconds to grind an 18 gram dose of espresso. It's got a power switch here on the side, and then on the menu it's going to give you a manual grind setting for espresso, so you can just hold it on and it will grind into your portafilter, as well as a single and double setting that you program by weight. And then it's got 3 settings each also for mocha and filter, and that's where things start to get kind of weird. We're gonna get there. Before we do get into that though, this grinder and all the AllGrounds actually, they have a very robust build, and that's because Fiorenzato has really been more present in the commercial grinder space than the home grinder space. The AllGrounds are kind of their first real push into the home market. A friend of mine put it this way, which I think is really great. It's kind of like a commercial grinder cosplaying as a home grinder, and I have taken it out on a couple pop-ups where, you know, I do for a short time, extremely high volume, and they're really nice to use. You also see people saying, hey, I'm considering this grinder as like a secondary or a decaf grinder for my cafe or pop-up. Also a great use case. Okay, let's talk about some tests that I run on all grinders that come through here. It is a bit loud, but not ear-splittingly loud. We'll listen in a second. I do also season all the grinders that I test, which basically means put a bunch of coffee through them to kind of get the burrs a little bit more settled. And this grinder was usable right out of the box. It did improve marginally, I'm gonna say, once I had a couple kilos through it, but also totally usable right out of the box. Alignment is something that I'll test as well, and this was very interesting. Alignment is basically for flat burrs, you know, you want them kind of perfectly parallel to each other. You don't want them tilted, it can mess up your grind consistency a little bit. And with this grinder, the way it's built, you can't exactly test it because you can't squeeze the burrs together tight enough in order to contact them to do what's called the marker wipe test. So I actually had to order a shim kit from Espresso Parts. They sent one over and I did shim the burrs up, test the alignment. Thankfully, it was fantastic, not worth adjusting. So that was great. Retention, I'm going to talk about shortly, but first off, using the grinder, it's very seamless. You just take your portafilter. It will detect when the portafilter is in there, which is great. So you can't actually activate the grinder without a portafilter in there. And then once you have your dose programmed, I have this program for 18 grams. I'll hit OK, and then I'll just hit the button. And it will stop and give you a little check mark when it's at 18 grams. And let's just weigh that out. And that is 18 grams on the dot. And that's very typical what I see with this grinder. It's basically flat in out to the 1/10 of a gram. So that's fantastic. As far as puck prep goes, when I'm doing like a pop-up or, high volume situation with family, I'll just give it a little shimmy and then tamp, and that's pretty good. If I have a little bit more time, I'll do WDT, but generally doesn't need it too much. Cleaning the grinder is super easy, which is a big plus of these grinders. You just turn the dial all the way to the course, slip this button down and pop it off, and you can be in there in about 30 seconds to clean everything out. And that is something that I really do like about these grinders. Now, I do want to talk about a couple critiques that I have with this grinder. First, I'm gonna see if I can do this, but sometimes when you have your portafilter in and it's just finishing up, it will kind of sputter a little bit so that it doesn't overshoot your weight, which is good. But if you are in a rush and you grab the portafilter when it's in one of those pauses, it can sometimes kind of glitch out and keep dumping beans out. Let's see if we can make that happen. Nope. Okay, so I made a mess, but couldn't repeat it. Take my word for it, it happens sometimes, and it's a big pain in the butt when it does. Thankfully, once you get burned a couple times that way, you get in the routine of just making sure it's finished before you take the portafilter out. I would love to see it adjusted so that never happens, and once it detects a portafilter removed, it just can't glitch out like that. Maybe a future firmware update, I don't know, just a note. Retention on this grinder is fairly high, which is not totally unusual for an on-demand grinder, but it's pretty high on this one. I measured between 6 and 6.5 grams of retention, and that's all coffee that has already been ground and is kind of working its way from the burr outlet to the chute. So that's a lot of retention. Now, if you're not changing your grind setting, it's not necessarily a huge deal. Those grounds sitting in there can get stale overnight, so you might want to purge a bit in the morning. You might not notice, but it is about 1/3 of a dose that's just kind of sitting in there, waiting to get pushed out from grinds that are coming up behind. And this is especially an issue if you're switching from filter to espresso. If you have espresso grounds, 6 grams worth, making it into a filter brew, or vice versa, that could really mess things up. But if you're just staying on espresso, you could probably pass with that. The alignment thing, not being able to test alignment, that's a bit of a negative from a grinder reviewer perspective. But as far as general use, like generally people are not going to the ends of the earth to make sure their on-demand grinders are perfectly aligned. And all the AllGrounds I've tested have been pretty well aligned from the factory anyway, so I'll give that one a pass. Step distance though is something that I have seen people criticize the AllGrounds of having too much gap between the steps, not enough fidelity is another way of saying that. Now, I asked the Fiorenzato team through Espresso Parts what the step distance is between the steps on this grinder, and they said 70 microns, which is a little bit silly. Like, that's just not true. That's wrong. There's no way it's 70 microns because the grinder would not at all be practical to use for espresso if that was the case. Now, I did compare it against another AllGround that I have where the dial is in microns, and I'm pretty sure all the threading is the same. And that being the case, one step would work out to, 13 to 14 microns, which sounds a lot closer to me based on the performance I'm seeing. And how that translates in terms of differences in shot time from one grind setting to the next, it's anywhere 2 to 4 seconds difference between one grind setting and another on an 18 gram shot of espresso, depending on what coffee you're using. So if that's too much gap for you, not enough precision, your mileage may vary. I'll let you decide on that. To put it in perspective, a grinder like the Mazzer Philos, which is a single dosing grinder, will have a step distance of 6.5 microns. So just about twice the potential possible precision out of a grinder like that. Now, the biggest critique, and this one is like straight up baffling to me. I do not understand at all. This grinder is fantastic, easy to use for espresso. And it's an AllGround, which the whole premise of it is that you can grind for espresso, for filter, and everything in between. Mochas, they're kind of middle of the road setting. The weird thing is though, there's no dosing bin or grinds cup included with this grinder. So you don't really have a way to like dose into a cup or like a pour over and then dump it into the pour over. They just don't include one. And the dosing bin for the old AllGround is pretty janky because it doesn't always work with the scale. Like sometimes you'll put it in and sometimes you can get it to work, but if it's touching certain parts, which it's designed to, it won't work. And it's not even included with this grinder anyways. It's just kind of a very weird picture. So as far as grinding for filter, I'm kind of grinding into an espresso portafilter and then dumping it into whatever I'm using for pour over. It's very strange. I had the guys at Espresso Parts ask Fiorenzato, what is the deal? How are you supposed to grind for filter with this grinder? And they didn't really have an answer, which was kind of weird. Hey there, time out. So I wouldn't normally do this, but Fiorenzato, after months of me bugging Espresso Parts and them bugging Fiorenzato about this weird issue with the Sense, finally did have an answer. And it looks like they're going to offer a new fork and dosing bin starting in June of 2024. Haven't seen it, don't know what it looks like, don't know how well it works. And apparently it's going to be offered as an add-on kit, which I would love to see it included. They did the add-on thing with Pietro. Nobody really liked that, but apparently it works for dosing filter. So I don't know if it will also work for dosing espresso, so you can flip back and forth without changing the whole fork. I have no idea, but I wanted to give you that update. There you go. So can it grind for pour over? Yes, sort of. Really only works very well when you're grinding into a portafilter. That is just all super weird and kind of counter to what the AllGround line is really supposed to be. You also have the AllGround Pro Brew, which can't grind for espresso at all. So it's not really grinding all things either. It's kind of strange. So you're left with a great espresso grinder that's a pleasure to use and look at, that can grind for filter if you're really in a pinch, sort of. That extremely strange part of the picture aside, let's make an espresso and see how it tastes. So you saw the two little shimmies there. All right, let's pull this, see how we do. All right, let's give this a taste. That is a good cup of espresso. So this is a Guatemalan coffee. I actually had it in the freezer from when we were down in Guatemala, and it's great. Like, I still have some definition, but with some good body. It's a very nice all around, comfy, cozy, still giving you a tinkle of brightness espresso grinder. Excuse me for a moment. It's fast, it's easy to use, it looks great, it's got commercial build quality, we got a lot of good stuff going for it. We got some weird negatives that I still don't really get and don't have some answers to, but if you're just looking for an espresso grinder, it's a grinder that I've quite enjoyed having on bar. So that's kind of the Fiorenzato AllGround. It's seamless, wonderful to use in some ways, maddeningly confusing in other ways, and I want to know what you think about it. What questions do you still have that I didn't answer in this video? Let me know, and if I can, I'll answer them in the comments. Let me know what you want to see next on my channel. I'm always looking for the coolest stuff to review on here, and I got a lot of really good stuff coming up. If this video was valuable or helpful for you at all, I would love for you to subscribe. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.